The bullet tore through the morning air before anyone heard the shot. Sister Ruth screamed. The sound ripped from her throat, raw and primal, as the wagon lurched sideways, horses rearing against their harnesses. Dust exploded around them in a choking red cloud. More gunfire. 3 shots. 4. 5. 6. The pattern was wrong. Sister Elena Vasquez knew this before her conscious mind could form the thought. Her body reacted first the way a soldier's body never forgets. She pulled Ruth down beneath the wagon's wooden bench, one hand pressing the young woman's head below the sideboard, the other already counting. 8 elevated positions, 4 ground level, 2 potential exit routes, both compromised. Winchesters, from the sound one Sharp's rifle, likely a designated marksman on the highest ridge. 12 shooters, maybe more. "Stay down," Elena whispered, her voice steady as stone. "Don't move until I tell you." Around them, chaos erupted. The other 2 wagons in their small caravan had stopped, their drivers frozen with fear. Sisters Teresa, Margaret, and the others huddled together, their black habits stark against the crimson desert landscape. Someone was praying in Latin. Someone else was crying. Elena forced herself to breathe. The gunfire had stopped as suddenly as it started. No screams of pain, no bodies falling. Warning shots then. Whoever they were, they wanted something other than blood. "Sister Elena," Ruth's voice trembled against her shoulder. "What's happening? Why did you—" "Hush." Elena's eyes swept the canyon walls rising on either side of them. The Superstition Mountains had swallowed their small party, whole red rock towering overhead like the walls of a cathedral built by the devil himself. She'd noticed the danger signs an hour ago. Fresh horse tracks where there should be none. The absence of birdsong. Smoke on the distant ridge. She'd said nothing. What could she have said? "I know these things because 20 years ago, I was the one setting ambushes. I was the one teaching men where to position themselves for maximum kill efficiency. I was the shadow that moved through battlefields while enemies slept." The memory rose unbidden. Blood on her hands, the weight of a rifle against her shoulder. Her father's voice proud and terrible. "La Sombra, my daughter, my weapon." Lena closed her eyes and pushed it down. That woman was dead. She'd buried her in the desert 18 years ago. But the dead, it seemed, had a way of rising. "Nobody move." The command echoed off the canyon walls, delivered in a voice that carried the cultured drawl of the Old South. "Any woman who runs gets a bullet in her back. Any woman who cooperates gets to live. Your choice, sisters." Men emerged from the rocks like scorpions from beneath stones. They moved with military precision, covering angles, maintaining sight lines, not common bandits, soldiers, or men who had been soldiers once before the world they fought for burned to ash. Elena counted them as they descended. 12, just as she'd calculated. Their leader rode a black horse, its coat gleaming like oil in the morning sun. He was perhaps 50 years old, silver threading through a once dark beard, and he wore his Confederate officer's coat like a man who refused to accept that his war had ended 2 decades ago. "Good morning, sisters." He removed his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "My name is Captain William Driscoll, and I'm afraid your pilgrimage has just taken an unexpected turn." Mother Superior Agnes was the first to stand. At 65 years old, Agnes had seen more death than any woman should. She'd held the hands of dying soldiers at Antietam, sutured wounds by candlelight at Gettysburg, and buried 3 of her own sisters to cholera on the journey west. Fear was a luxury she'd long since abandoned. "Captain Driscoll," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of a woman accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful men. "We are servants of God on a holy mission. We carry nothing of value except our faith." Driscoll's smile didn't reach his eyes. "With respect, Mother, the Diocese of California might disagree about your value. $10,000 is what I estimate you're worth. Maybe more if the bishop truly believes in protecting his flock. You're holding us for ransom. I prefer to think of it as an involuntary contribution to veterans who served their country and were forgotten by it." Driscoll dismounted his boots, raising small clouds of dust. "The United States took everything from us. Our land, our honor, our future. It seems only fair that its institutions pay something back." Elena watched from beneath her lowered hood. She'd positioned herself near the back of the group, unremarkable and visible. Just another nun in a sea of black fabric. It was a role she'd perfected over 18 years, but her hands wouldn't stop moving. She'd already identified 3 weapons within reach. A knife on the belt of the young bandit to her left, a pistol poorly holstered on the older man guarding the rear wagon, and something long and heavy beneath the tarp covering their supplies, something that felt like a rifle even though she knew it was only a wooden cross. Her fingers twitched toward the knife. 3 seconds. That's all it would take. Disable the boy, take his blade, cut across the throat of the man behind me before he can draw. Use his body as a shield while I grab the pistol. 8 more men on the ground, 4 in elevated positions. I'd need to move fast, find cover. Thin their numbers before Elena caught herself. Her heart was racing. Her breath came short and sharp. And somewhere deep in her chest, in the place where she'd locked away the woman she used to be, something stirred. Something hungry. No. She forced her hands to still, forced her breathing to slow, forced herself to remember who she was now, who she'd chosen to become. I am Sister Elena Vasquez. I tend gardens. I pray. I have not taken a life in 18 years. But even as she recited the words like a mantra, her eyes kept tracking the bandits, kept counting, kept calculating. The young one, the boy who'd moved to guard them, he couldn't be more than 24 with soft features that hadn't yet hardened into cruelty. His hands shook slightly on his rifle. First real job, probably. Reluctant. The man Driscoll called Silas stood apart from the others, watching the prisoners with an unsettling intensity. He wore a preacher's black coat over his trail clothes, and his smile carried the particular madness of a man who had once believed in something and now believed in nothing at all. Red Cooper, the one-eyed marksman, had positioned himself on the ridge with his Sharps rifle. Left eye missing, which meant a blind spot on that side. Useful information if Elena ever needed to approach him unseen. Stop it. Stop thinking like that. You're not that woman anymore. Sister. The voice made Elena jump. Sister Ruth had appeared beside her, face pale, eyes red from crying. Sister Elena, I'm scared. Elena reached out and took the young woman's hand. It was trembling. I know, Ruth, I know. She kept her voice soft, maternal, the voice of a nun. But we must have faith. God will protect us. Ruth looked at her with desperate hope. Do you really believe that? Elena hesitated. 20 years ago, she would have laughed at the question. God didn't protect people. Guns protected people. Tactics and training, and the will to do what others couldn't, that was what kept you alive. But 20 years ago, she'd been someone else entirely. I believe, Elena said slowly, that God puts us where we need to be, even when we don't understand why. It wasn't really an answer, but Ruth seemed to find comfort in it, squeezing Elena's hand before moving to comfort Sister Teresa, whose breathing had become labored and uneven. Elena watched her go, where we need to be. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the test she'd always known was coming. 18 years of prayer and penance, of trying to wash the blood from her hands, and now God had delivered her into the hands of men who dealt in violence. Was it a chance for redemption, or a punishment for sins that could never be forgiven? Elena didn't know. She wasn't sure she wanted to find out. They marched for 3 hours. The bandits confiscated the wagons, the horses, and everything of value the sisters carried. Communion wine silver candlesticks meant for the new mission in Tucson, even the small amount of money Mother Agnes kept for emergencies. The sisters were allowed to keep only their habits, their rosaries, and their faith. The mining camp appeared as the sun reached its zenith, shimmering like a mirage in the desert heat. It had been abandoned for decades, a relic of the gold rush that had swept through Arizona territory and left nothing but empty holes and broken dreams. Now it served a darker purpose. Wooden structures sagged against the mountainside. A main building, once the mine's administrative office, still stood relatively intact. Several smaller cabins dotted the perimeter, their windows boarded, their doors reinforced. And behind everything, the dark mouth of the mine shaft gaped like the entrance to hell itself. Welcome to your temporary home, sisters, Driscoll announced as they stumbled into the camp. I trust you'll find the accommodations adequate for your needs. Mother Agnes stepped forward. How long do you intend to keep us here? That depends entirely on how quickly your bishop responds to our invitation. Driscoll's tone remained pleasant, almost courtly. 10 days should be sufficient for a message to reach California and a reply to return. After that, he shrugged eloquently, and if the diocese refuses to pay, something flickered in Driscoll's eyes, something cold. Then I suppose we'll have to find other ways to make our point, won't we? They were herded into the largest cabin and locked inside. The space was cramped, barely adequate for 5 women, let alone 9. A single window too small to climb through let in a square of harsh afternoon light. The floor was packed earth, the walls bare wood that had warped and cracked with age. Elena assessed the room automatically. One door barred from outside, the window useless. The walls were solid enough to stop a bullet, but rotten enough in places that she might be able to create an exit if she had tools and time. The floor showed signs of settlement, suggesting there might be space beneath the cabin, possibly connected to the mine tunnels. Stop it. The way your hands sometimes move without you rehearsing movements you swore you'd forgotten. Elena's throat tightened. I have forgotten. I've tried to forget. Child, we can't forget who we were. Agnes reached out and took Elena's hands in her own. They were old hands, weathered by decades of service, but still strong. The question isn't whether you remember how to fight. The question is whether you'll choose to use those memories. I made a vow. You vowed to never take a life in anger. You vowed to never let hatred guide your hand. Agnes squeezed her fingers. You never vowed to let innocent women die when you had the power to save them. Elena pulled away. You don't understand. The things I did, the person I was. She pressed her palms against her eyes. If I start again, I don't know if I can stop. I don't know if there's anything left of me that isn't that. That what? The word came out as barely a whisper. A killer. Agnes was silent for a long moment. Outside, they could hear the bandits moving about the camp, laughing, calling to one another. The ordinary sounds of men going about their day as if they hadn't just shattered 9 lives with their demands. Do you know why I accepted you into the order? Agnes asked finally. Elena shook her head. It wasn't because you were pious. Lord knows you weren't. Half the Latin prayers you'd memorized were wrong. You didn't even know how to properly genuflect. Agnes smiled at the memory. I accepted you because I saw something in your eyes that I recognized. What? Exhaustion. The kind that goes bone deep, soul deep. The exhaustion of someone who has done terrible things and cannot live with themselves anymore. Agnes's voice softened. I saw that look in the mirror after the war. After all those boys I watched die in my arms, all the limbs I helped amputate, all the screams I couldn't silence. I nearly drowned myself in a river outside Richmond. Did you know that? Elena stared at her. The water was so cold, Agnes continued, cold enough to numb everything. I walked in up to my waist before something stopped me. A voice or a feeling, I'm still not sure which. But it told me that my suffering wasn't a reason to die. It was a reason to live differently. That's not the same. You were healing people. You were surviving in a world that gave you no other choice. Agnes took Elena's hands again, and this time Elena didn't pull away. The woman you used to be, La Sombra, the shadow. She isn't a demon to be exorcised. She's a part of you. And perhaps, just perhaps, God put her there for a reason. To kill, to protect. Agnes's eyes were fierce. There's a difference, Elena, and deep down you know it. Before Elena could respond, the cabin door crashed open. The man who stood in the doorway wasn't Driscoll. He was younger, wilder, with eyes that glittered like broken glass in the afternoon light. His black coat marked him as the one they called preacher, the one Elena had noted earlier as unpredictable. Which one of you is the old bat in charge? He demanded. Mother Agnes stepped forward without hesitation. I am Mother Superior Agnes. How may I help you, Silas, the preacher? Cain looked her up and down with something between contempt and amusement. Captain wants to see you. Something about terms and conditions. His gaze swept the room, lingering on the younger sisters. Just you, old woman, nobody else. Perhaps I should, Elena began. Did I say anyone else? Silas's hand dropped to his pistol. Stay put, sister. You'll get your turn. Agnes gave Elena a warning look. Don't. Not yet. Then she straightened her spine and walked out into the blinding sunlight, leaving the others behind. The door slammed shut. The bar fell into place. Sister Ruth immediately rushed to Elena's side. What are they going to do to her? What if they hurt her? They won't hurt her, Elena said, though she wasn't certain of anything. She's worth money to them. They need her alive. But it wasn't Agnes she was worried about. Mother Superior could hold her own against any man with nothing but words and willpower. It was what might happen after what demands Driscoll might make, what prices he might set that they couldn't pay. The afternoon wore on. The sisters prayed. They sang hymns in soft voices. They comforted one another as best they could. And Elena watched the window. She watched the guards change positions, noting their patterns, their habits. The young one, Billy, took the afternoon shift. He seemed uncomfortable with his role, averting his eyes whenever he glanced toward the cabin. Twice she saw him sneak extra water to the old man who worked in the camp kitchen, a grizzled figure who moved with the permanent stoop of someone who had spent years underground. When the door finally opened again, it was nearly sunset. Agnes entered alone, her face carefully composed. But Elena could read the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her eyes. "What happened?" Sister Margaret demanded. "What did they want?" Agnes raised her hand for silence. She waited until the door closed and the bar fell back into place before she spoke. "Captain Driscoll has sent a messenger to the diocese. We have 10 days to wait for a response. If the ransom is paid, we'll be released unharmed. If not—" She trailed off. "If not what?" Agnes looked at Elena. The message in her eyes was clear. "We need to talk, alone." "If not, we'll trust in God's providence," Agnes said to the room. "Now, sisters, let us pray." They formed a circle, heads bowed, hands clasped. The familiar words of the rosary filled the cabin, a rhythm that Elena had come to find comforting over the years. But tonight the words felt hollow. Tonight she couldn't focus on prayer. She was too busy planning. When the prayers ended and the sisters settled for sleep, Agnes made her way to Elena's corner. They sat with their backs to the wall, speaking in voices barely above a whisper. "They won't pay," Agnes said simply. "Driscoll knows it. The diocese has a policy of never negotiating with kidnappers. Too many missions have been targeted over the years." "Then what happens in 10 days? He didn't say explicitly, but I could see it in his eyes. Agnes's voice trembled slightly. "He's not a common criminal, Elena. He's a man with grievances, real or imagined. Men like that, when they feel wronged by the world, they want to make the world hurt as much as they do." Elena's hands curled into fists. "He'll kill us. Or worse." Agnes took a breath. "There's something else. Sister Teresa's medicine was in the supplies they confiscated. Without it, her heart condition will deteriorate. I asked Driscoll to return it. He refused." "What?" Elena's voice rose before she could stop it. Across the cabin, Sister Ruth stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. "He said it was leverage," Agnes continued. "Insurance to make sure we cooperate. If we behave, he'll consider giving her the medicine. If we don't—" The sentence hung in the air, ugly and incomplete. Elena felt something stir in her chest. Something cold and focused and very, very old. "I'll talk to him," she heard herself say. "Elena, no. You'll only draw attention to yourself. Teresa will die without that medicine. How long can she last?" Agnes hesitated. "A few days, perhaps a week, without the digitalis to regulate her heartbeat." She shook her head. "Then I have to trim it." Elena stood, adjusting her habit. "I'll be careful. I'll be meek. I'll be exactly what he expects a nun to be. And if he sees through you, if he realizes you're not what you appear—" Elena looked at the door. Beyond it, the camp had fallen quiet as the bandits settled in for the night. Only the guards remained awake, their shadows passing occasionally across the boarded window. "Then I suppose we'll find out if 18 years of penance was enough to change who I am." She knocked on the door before Agnes could stop her. The guard who opened the door was the young one, Billy. Up close, Elena could see the downy stubble on his cheeks, the nervousness in his eyes. A boy playing at being a man, pretending to be hard when everything about him screamed soft. "What do you want?" he demanded, though the demand sounded more like a question. "I need to speak with Captain Driscoll. Please, it's urgent." Billy hesitated. "Captain's busy. One of my sisters is dying." Elena let her voice crack, let her eyes fill with the tears she'd learned to summon at will during her years of deception. Her heart medicine was taken. "Without it, she won't survive the week. Please, I'm begging you, just let me speak with him." The boy's face twisted with uncertainty. Behind him, the second guard, an older man with a face like weathered leather, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Let her go, Billy. Driscoll will want to hear this. Billy looked at Elena, then at his companion, then back at Elena. Finally, he stepped aside. Don't try anything stupid, sister. I'll be right behind you. The walk to the main building took only a minute, but Elena used every second. She cataloged the layout of the camp, the positions of the men still awake, the horses tied near the mine entrance. 12 bandits, as she'd counted before. But only 4 seemed to be on guard duty. The others were drinking around a fire pit, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Driscoll's headquarters occupied the old mine office, a structure slightly more substantial than the others. Light flickered through gaps in the window boards, casting striped shadows across the porch. Billy knocked twice. "Captain, one of the nuns wants to talk to you." A pause, then Driscoll's voice smooth and unhurried. "Send her in." Elena stepped through the door. The room was surprisingly well appointed for a bandit's lair. A desk, salvaged from the mine's better days, sat in the center, covered with papers and maps. Oil lamps cast warm light across wooden walls decorated with Confederate memorabilia, a tattered flag, a cavalry saber, a faded photograph of young men in gray uniforms. Driscoll sat behind the desk, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He'd removed his coat, revealing a white shirt gone gray with trail dust. Without the trappings of command, he looked older, tired. Well, he gestured to a chair across from him. "Please, sister, sit. I don't often have the pleasure of female company, and when I do, I prefer to be civilized about it." Elena sat. Her posture was perfect, her hands folded demurely in her lap. Every inch the humble servant of God. "Thank you for seeing me, Captain." "Driscoll, please." He sipped his whiskey. "We're going to be spending quite some time together. No need for excessive formality." "Driscoll, then." Elena lowered her eyes. "I've come about Sister Teresa. She has a condition of the heart. Without her medicine, she'll die." "Yes, your Mother Superior mentioned that." Driscoll's tone was almost sympathetic. "A tragic situation. The medicine was among our supplies. If you would simply return it and lose my leverage." Driscoll shook his head. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sister. The medicine stays where it is until I'm satisfied that your fellow nuns are cooperating fully with my requests." "What more cooperation do you need? We're locked in a cabin, unarmed, surrounded by your men. What threat could we possibly pose?" Driscoll studied her over the rim of his glass. "You tell me." The words hung in the air between them. Elena felt his eyes on her, probing, assessing. Not the idle gaze of a man looking at a woman, but the calculating attention of a soldier evaluating a potential threat. "I'm not sure I understand," she said carefully. "Then let me be direct." Driscoll set down his glass. "I've been watching you, sister. You're different from the others. When the shooting started, you didn't scream. You didn't pray. You pulled that young one down and covered her like a soldier protecting a comrade under fire." Elena's heart began to beat faster, though she kept her expression neutral. "Instinct," she said. "Nothing more." "Perhaps, but there's something else." Driscoll leaned forward. "The way you carry yourself. The way your eyes move, always watching, always calculating. The way you spoke to me earlier about Sister Teresa dying, about losing your ransom money. You weren't begging, you were negotiating, making an argument based on logic and self-interest rather than appealing to mercy. I thought logic might be more persuasive. It was. That's what concerns me." Driscoll stood and walked around the desk, stopping in front of Elena's chair. "Most nuns I've encountered, they're soft, sheltered. They believe in the goodness of men because they've never seen what men are truly capable of. But you," he tilted his head, "you've seen things, haven't you, sister, done things. Things that don't fit neatly into a life of prayer and contemplation." Elena forced herself to meet his eyes, to project nothing but innocence and confusion. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, Captain. I'm just a simple woman who tends gardens and says her prayers. Before I took my vows, I was a farmer's daughter from San Diego. Nothing more." Driscoll held her gaze for a long moment. Then he smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach his eyes. "Of course you were." He returned to his seat, picked up his glass. "Tell you what, sister. In the spirit of Christian charity, I'll allow your Mother Superior to administer Sister Teresa's medicine. Once a day under supervision. Does that satisfy you?" Elena inclined her head. "It does. Thank you. But I want you to remember something." Driscoll's voice hardened. "I'm watching you. If you're not what you appear to be, I will find out. And when I do, the consequences won't just fall on you. They'll fall on everyone you're trying to protect. I understand. Good. Billy will escort you back to your cabin. He waved a dismissive hand. Pleasant dreams, sister. Elena Rose curtsied and turned toward the door. She was 3 steps away when Driscoll spoke again. One more thing. She stopped. Turned. That accent of yours, Driscoll said slowly. San Diego, you said yes. Funny, because every now and then when you're not paying attention, I hear something else underneath. Something that sounds almost Mexican. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. My grandmother was from Sonora, Elena said. I spent summers with her as a child. I suppose some of her speech patterns stayed with me. Driscoll nodded, his face unreadable. I see. Well, good night, sister. Good night. Elena walked out of the room with measured steps, her spine straight, her breathing even. But inside the shadow was stirring. Sleep wouldn't come. Elena lay on the hard earth floor, listening to the breathing of the women around her. Sister Ruth murmured in her dreams, restless and afraid. Sister Margaret's snores provided a counterpoint, steady and untroubled. Sister Teresa's breath came in the shallow gasps that made Elena wince with each labored inhalation. Outside, the guards changed shifts. Elena tracked the sound of footsteps, the murmur of voices, the clink of metal against metal. 2 guards, now both awake, walking a slow circuit around the cabin. She could take them. The thought arrived unbidden, unwelcome, and absolutely certain. The young one, Billy, would be easy. He telegraphed his movements, held his rifle wrong, let his attention wander. She could have his weapon before he knew she was there. The older one would be harder, but not impossible. A distraction, a misdirection, and she could be behind him before he turned around. Stop! Stop it! Lena pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to force the thoughts away. But they kept coming, wave after wave, a flood of tactical possibilities that her mind generated without permission. Take the guards, arm yourself, move through the camp in the darkness, eliminate the sentries one by one. You know how, you remember. It's like riding a horse, like breathing. The body doesn't forget. She remembered her first kill. 16 years old, a Spanish soldier who'd wandered away from his unit to relieve himself. She'd been trembling so badly that she'd almost dropped the knife. But when the moment came, her hands had been steady. They'd always been steady. 23 men. That was the count, the number she'd carried with her for 2 decades, a weight that never lessened, a debt that could never be repaid. 23 men who'd had names, families, dreams. 23 men who'd never grown old because of her. She'd told herself it was necessary. Her father had told her it was righteous. We are fighting for our homeland, for our freedom. Every enemy we kill is one less threat to our people. And she'd believed it. For years she'd believed it, until the day they killed her father. General Augusto Morales executed by firing squad while his daughter watched. Betrayed by one of his own officers, a man he'd trusted like a brother. Elena remembered the sound of the rifles, the way her father's body jerked and fell, the way he'd looked at her in that final moment with something that might have been pride or might have been regret. Don't let hatred consume you, mija. Promise me. Find another way to live. She'd broken that promise. Broken it within a month of his death when she tracked down the traitor to a cantina in Hermosillo and put a knife through his heart. Not quickly, not cleanly. She'd wanted him to know who was killing him and why. She'd wanted to see the fear in his eyes. And she had. She'd seen it, she'd felt it. And for one terrible moment, she'd enjoyed it. That was when Elena Morales died, not in body but in spirit. The woman who walked out of that cantina was no longer human. She was a machine made of grief and rage, a shadow without substance, a thing that killed because killing was all it knew how to do. She'd killed 3 more men before she reached the border. Men who got in her way, men who threatened her, men who simply looked at her wrong. Each death came easier than the last. Each death carved away another piece of who she'd been. By the time she stumbled into the mission, Santa Cruz, half-starved and burning with fever, there was almost nothing left. Mother Agnes had found her collapsed in the courtyard, had nursed her back to health, had listened without judgment as the whole terrible story poured out all the blood and sin and fury. And when it was done, when Elena had sobbed herself, empty, Agnes had said something that changed everything. The woman you were is dead. Today you can choose who you want to become. 18 years. 18 years of choosing peace over violence, prayer over planning redemption over revenge. 18 years of believing that she could be someone other than La Sombra, the shadow, the death that came in the night. And now lying on a dirt floor with 8 innocent women depending on her, Elena felt it all slipping away. She rose quietly, moving to the single window. Through the gaps in the boards, she could see stars scattered across the desert sky, like salt on black cloth. The moon was new, barely a sliver. Good for movement, bad for guards trying to spot intruders. Stop it. But she couldn't. Her mind kept running. Calculations, kept assessing threats, kept planning operations that she knew she would never execute. Because executing them would mean becoming La Sombra again. And La Sombra had been a monster. But La Sombra could save them. The thought was quiet, insidious, undeniable. You know how to do this. You know how to get them out. The skills are still there, buried under years of prayer and penance, waiting to be used. All you have to do is let them out. Elena looked at her hands. In the starlight, they seemed to glow faintly pale shapes against the darkness of her habit. Hands that had planted gardens. Hands that had prepared medicines. Hands that had held rosaries and lit candles and touched the faces of the sick and dying with gentleness and care. Hands that had killed 23 men. The same hands, always the same hands. Tomorrow she would begin gathering information, mapping the camp, learning routines, identifying weaknesses. Not to act on, she told herself, not to use, just to have, just in case. But even as she formed the thought, she knew it was a lie. The shadow was waking, and Elena wasn't sure she could put it back to sleep. Morning brought new horrors and new possibilities. Sister Teresa had worsened overnight. Her skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her breathing came in sharp, painful gasps. The other sisters gathered around her, praying, holding her hands, murmuring words of comfort that seemed increasingly hollow. Mother Agnes administered the first dose of medicine under the watchful eye of Red Cooper, who stood in the doorway with his hand on his pistol, as if expecting the elderly nun to suddenly produce a weapon from beneath her habit. Elena used the distraction to study the camp. Through the window, she could see the layout more clearly in daylight. The main building where Driscoll stayed sat at the center of the compound, commanding a view of all approaches. The mine entrance gaped behind the smaller cabins, dark and forbidding. Guards moved in predictable patterns, switching positions every few hours. And there near the fire pit where the bandits cooked their meals, she saw someone new. An old man, 70 at least, with a back bent by decades of hard labor and skin weathered to the color and texture of old leather. He moved around the cooking area with the familiarity of long practice, stirring pots, banking coals, avoiding the bandits, with the practiced invisibility of someone who had learned to make himself small. A prisoner, Elena realized. Like them, but longer, much longer. She needed to talk to him. The opportunity came that afternoon. Elena had convinced Driscoll through Billy that the sisters needed proper food if they were to remain healthy enough to be valuable hostages. To her surprise, he'd agreed, allowing them an access to the camp kitchen under supervision. It was a small victory, but victories were measured differently in captivity. She volunteered to help with the cooking. The old man eyed her warily as she approached. Up close, she could see the marks of hard use on his body, old scars, missing fingers, a hitch in his step that suggested a badly healed broken leg. "I'm Sister Elena," she said softly, picking up a knife to peel potatoes. "What's your name?" He was silent for a long moment. Then in a voice like gravel sliding down a slope, "Samuel, just Samuel." "How long have you been here, Samuel?" 2 years, maybe more. Hard to keep track." Elena's hands moved automatically, the knife sliding through potato skin with practiced efficiency. She'd prepared enough meals in the mission kitchen to make the work second nature, leaving her mind free to think. "Were you a miner?" 40 years in these mountains." Samuel's voice carried a weary pride. "I know every tunnel, every shaft, every secret pocket of ore for 50 miles. That's why they keep me alive. That's why they keep anyone alive." He glanced at her. "You'd best remember that, sister. Make yourself useful or make yourself gone." "Gone how?" "There's only one way out of this camp, and it's guarded." Samuel's hands paused over his work. Just for a moment. Just long enough for Elena to notice. "Is there another way, Samuel?" "You didn't hear it from me." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "The old mine shaft, the main one, it caved in 20 years ago. But there's a side tunnel, an exploratory dig that goes clean through the mountain and comes out on the other side, maybe 2 miles from the Pinal Road. Elena's heart quickened, but she kept her face neutral, her movements steady. Do the bandits know about it? Driscoll does. Uses it sometimes for supply runs when he doesn't want to be seen. Samuel shot her a sharp look. But the passage is tricky. Dark as sin and twice as dangerous. One wrong turn, you'd wander until you starved. But you know the way. I know the way. Samuel turned back to his work. Been waiting 2 years for someone brave enough to try. Or maybe stupid enough. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Elena processed this information, storing it away in the tactical part of her mind that was already mapping possibilities. Why are you telling me this? Samuel's weathered face creased into something that might have been a smile. Because I've been watching you, sister. The way you move, the way you think, you ain't like the others. Got soldier's eyes, you do. Seen things, done things. He shrugged. I figure if anyone's going to get us out of here, it might as well be the one who's got a chance of succeeding. Before Elena could respond, a shadow fell across the cooking area. Well, well. Silas the preacher Cain stepped into view, his mad eyes glittering with amusement. Making friends, sister. How very Christian of you. Elena lowered her gaze, playing the humble nun. Just helping with the cooking, Mr. Cain, as the captain suggested. Sure you are. Silas moved closer, close enough that Elena could smell the whiskey on his breath. You know what I think? I think you are up to something. I can smell it on you, like sulfur before a storm. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. No, Silas leaned in his voice, dropping to a whisper, meant only for her. Then maybe you should know something about me, sister. Before I found God and then lost him again, I was a tracker, best in 3 counties. I could follow a man through a rainstorm across a river through a herd of cattle. You know what that means? Elena said nothing. It means I know when someone's lying. Silas's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with bruising force. And you, Sister Elena Vasquez, are lying with every breath you take. For one terrible moment, Elena felt the shadows surge within her, felt her muscles tense, her weight shift, her free hand curl into a position that could strike disable kill. The old man who called himself preacher would be dead before he hit the ground if she let instinct take over. She didn't. With an effort that felt like moving mountains, Elena forced herself to go limp, to tremble, to let tears well up in her eyes. Please, she whispered. You're hurting me. Silas held on a moment longer, searching her face for something. Then with a sound of disgust, he released her. Watch yourself, sister. Driscoll may be taken in by that innocent act of yours, but I see what you are, and when the time comes, I'll be ready. He stalked away, leaving Elena alone with Samuel and the cooling coals. That one's dangerous, Samuel murmured. I know. No, Samuel's voice was grim. I mean dangerous. Even the others are scared of him. When Driscoll ain't looking, he does things. Things that don't bear repeating in front of a woman of the cloth. Elena looked at the old man, at the fear in his eyes, at the scars visible beneath the collar of his worn shirt. Then we'd better move quickly, she said, before he decides to do those things to my sisters. Samuel nodded slowly. You got a plan. I'm working on one. It wasn't exactly true. She had fragments, possibilities, the beginning of something that might become a strategy. But telling Samuel that felt like making a commitment, felt like stepping onto a path she wasn't sure she could walk. The shadow stirred again, eager, hungry. Soon it seemed to whisper, soon you'll have to choose. And we both know what you'll decide. Elena finished peeling the potatoes in silence, her hands steady as stone, her heart at war with itself. Night fell like a hammer on the desert. Elena lay in the darkness of the cabin, listening to the sounds of the camp settling into sleep. The guards had changed 3 times since sundown. The pattern was established now, predictable. 2 men every 4 hours walking a circuit that took exactly 12 minutes to complete, leaving gaps of nearly 2 minutes when the cabin was unwatched. 2 minutes, long enough to move, not long enough to escape, not without help, not without a distraction, not without... She cut the thought off, but it kept returning, insistent as a heartbeat. Around her, the other sisters slept. Even Sister Teresa had found a fitful rest, her breathing eased somewhat by the medicine. Mother Agnes lay nearby, her face peaceful in the moonlight that filtered through the window boards. They trust me, Elena thought. They trust me to pray with them, to comfort them, to be the calm center of their terror. And I'm lying to them with every breath. She closed her eyes, tried to find the peace that prayer had once brought her. Hail Mary, full of grace. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she saw maps, escape routes, kill zones. She saw herself moving through the camp like smoke silent and deadly, leaving bodies in her wake. The Lord is with thee. She saw Driscoll's face when she cut his throat, saw Silas's eyes go wide with shock as her knife found his heart, saw the young bandit Billy falling before he could even raise his weapon. Blessed art thou amongst women. 23 men. That had been the count. But the number could grow. Numbers always grew in war. Elena opened her eyes. Sister Ruth was watching her. You're not asleep either, Ruth whispered. No. I keep thinking about home. Ruth's voice was soft, careful not to wake the others. My family's farm in Oregon. My mother's cooking. My father's laugh. She paused. Do you have a family sister, Elena, before you took your vows, I mean? Elena considered lying. She'd become so good at it over the years, building a fictional past brick by careful brick. But something in Ruth's eyes, some desperate need for connection in the darkness, made her hesitate. I had a father, she said finally. He died when I was young. I'm sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. Elena shifted, uncomfortable with even this small truth. What about your mother? Died when I was born. It was just me and my father and my brothers for most of my life. 7 brothers. Ruth smiled at the memory. I joined the convent partly to escape all that testosterone. And now you're surrounded by men again. God has a sense of humor, apparently. Ruth's smile faded. Sister Elena, can I ask you something? Of course. Are we going to die here? The question hung in the air between them, stark and terrible. Elena thought about lying, thought about offering comfort, reassurance, the kind of empty promises that good nuns were supposed to make. Instead, she said, not if I can help it. Ruth studied her face in the darkness. You're different from the others. I've always known that, even before all this. There's something in you that doesn't quite fit, like you're wearing a mask. We all wear masks, Ruth. Maybe, but yours seems heavier than most. Ruth reached out, took Elena's hand. Her fingers were cold. I don't know what you're hiding. I don't know what happened to you before you came to the mission. But I trust you. Whatever you're planning, whatever you're thinking about doing, I trust you to protect us. She shouldn't, Elena thought. She really, really shouldn't. But she didn't say that. Instead, she squeezed Ruth's hand and said, get some sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day. What happens tomorrow? Elena looked toward the window, toward the stars wheeling slowly overhead, toward a future that was dark and uncertain and filled with choices she didn't want to make. Tomorrow, she said, I start gathering information, learning routines, finding weaknesses. That sounds like planning an escape, yes. Ruth was silent for a moment. Then in a voice barely above a breath, can you do it? Can you get us out? Elena thought about her hands, about the things they'd done, about the things they might have to do again. I don't know, she admitted, but I'm going to try, and nodded as if this was enough, as if Elena's uncertainty was somehow reassuring. Then I'll pray for you, she said. I'll pray that God gives you the strength to do what needs to be done. She rolled over and closed her eyes, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts. The strength to do what needs to be done. Elena looked at her hands again. Steady hands, killer's hands. Maybe God already did, she thought. Maybe that's the problem. The night deepened, the stars turned, and somewhere in the darkness of Elena's soul, the shadow stretched and yawned and began very slowly to wake. The third day dawned gray and cold. Elena had spent the night cataloging everything she'd learned. The guards' patterns, the layout of the camp, the weaknesses she'd observed in each of Driscoll's men. Her mind worked the way it had been trained to work, turning chaos into order, fear into information, desperation into strategy. She hated how natural it felt. Sister Elena, Ruth's voice pulled her from her calculations. The young woman stood at the edge of Elena's sleeping space, her face pale in the early morning light, filtering through the window boards. You were talking in your sleep, Ruth said quietly. In Spanish, you sounded frightened. Elena forced herself to smile. Just dreams. Nothing more. What were you dreaming about? Blood, fire, the sound of rifles at dawn. My father's body crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. I don't remember, Elena lied. What is it, Ruth? You look troubled. Ruth glanced over her shoulder, checking that the other sisters were still asleep. Only Mother Agnes was awake, watching them from across the room with knowing eyes. I need to ask you something, Ruth whispered. Yesterday when that man, Red Cooper, he was saying things to me, terrible things, and you came and stood up between us, and he just stopped, like he was afraid of you. Elena's heart sank. I was protecting you. That's all. No, Ruth shook her head. It was more than that. The way you looked at him, the way you moved, I've never seen anyone move like that before. Like you were about to do something. Ruth, and you know things. Ruth's voice was barely audible now. You know the names of the guns they carry. You know when the guards change shifts without even looking at a clock. Last night when that bandit dropped his knife, you flinched toward it like you wanted to grab it. The silence stretched between them. Please, Ruth said, her eyes filling with tears. I need to understand. I need to know if the person I've trusted for 3 years is real, or if she's just a mask. Elena looked at this young woman, this innocent soul who had shown her nothing but kindness and admiration. She thought about the lies she could tell, the deflections she could offer, the ways she could preserve the fiction of Sister Elena Vasquez for a little longer. Instead, she said, the mask is real, Ruth. It's just not the only thing that's real. Ruth blinked. I don't understand. Before I came to the mission, I was someone else. Someone who did terrible things for what she believed were good reasons. Elena took Ruth's hands in her own. I'm not that person anymore. I've spent 18 years trying to become someone better. But the skills I learned, the instincts I developed, they don't disappear just because you pray hard enough. What kind of skills? Elena hesitated. Then very softly, the kind that might keep us alive. Ruth stared at her for a long moment. Elena could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between the trust she'd built over years and the fear of the unknown. Can you teach me, Ruth finally asked, teach you how to stay calm, how to watch without being watched, Ruth swallowed, how to survive, in case something happens and you're not there to protect me. It was such a small request, such a simple thing, and yet it felt like crossing a line that Elena had sworn never to cross again. Don't teach the young to fight. Don't pass on the poison. Let it die with you. But looking at Ruth's frightened, determined face, Elena realized something. The poison was already loose in the world. Men like Driscoll and Silas carried it with them, spreading it everywhere they went. The question wasn't whether violence existed. The question was whether good people would know how to survive it. Breathe, Elena said quietly. That's the first lesson. When you're afraid, your body wants to panic. Your heart races. Your vision narrows, your hands shake. But if you breathe slowly and deeply, you can control it. Ruth nodded, her eyes fixed on Elena's face. Observe, Elena continued. Don't just look, observe. Notice where people stand. Notice what they're carrying. Notice where the exits are, where the shadows fall, where you could hide if you needed to. And then you wait. You plan. You never act until you have to, because action draws attention, and attention is dangerous. Elena squeezed Ruth's hands. And you always have a backup plan, because the first plan never works the way you expect it to. Ruth was silent for a moment, processing this. Then she asked, where did you learn all this? The question hung in the air between them. From my father, Elena said at last. He was a soldier, a general actually. He taught me everything he knew about war and survival, and how to stay alive when everything around you is trying to kill you. What happened to him? Elena closed her eyes. He died a long time ago. She felt Ruth's arms wrap around her in a sudden fierce embrace. For a moment, Elena didn't know how to respond. Affection still felt foreign after so many years of keeping people at a distance. Then she returned the hug, holding Ruth close. Thank you, Ruth whispered, for telling me the truth. I haven't told you everything. I know, but you told me enough. Ruth pulled back, wiping her eyes. Whatever you're planning, whatever you're going to do, I want to help. Elena looked at her, this young woman who was too innocent for the world they'd been thrown into, and she made a decision. Then I need you to watch the guards today. Note which ones seem tired, which ones drink, which ones look away when they should be paying attention. Can you do that? Ruth nodded, her jaw set with determination. Good. Elena glanced toward the window where the morning sun was beginning to cut through the boards. And Ruth, don't tell the others. Not yet. Some of them aren't ready to know what we might have to do. The kitchen became Elena's battlefield. Under the guise of cooking for the camp, she'd positioned herself at the heart of enemy territory. The fire pit where the bandits took their meals sat in the center of the compound, giving her a clear view of every building, every movement, every weakness in Driscoll's operation. Old Samuel worked beside her in silence, his gnarled hands moving automatically through tasks he'd performed thousands of times before. Peeling vegetables, stirring pots, feeding fires. The rhythms of a captive who had learned to make himself indispensable. You've been watching them, Samuel murmured on the third afternoon, his voice pitched below the noise of crackling flames. Counting, measuring. Elena kept her eyes on the pot she was stirring. I don't know what you mean. Sure you don't. The old man's laugh was dry as desert wind. I've been in these mountains 40 years, sister. I've seen soldiers and miners and outlaws of every stripe. I know what a hunter looks like even when she's dressed like prey. Elena said nothing. That one there, Samuel continued, nodding toward a bandit lounging by the horse corral. That's Jake Morrison. Drinks too much, talks too much, falls asleep on watch at least twice a week. And the big one by the mine entrance, that's Tom Burke. Strong as an ox, dumb as a rock. Does whatever Silas tells him. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm 70 years old and I'd like to die somewhere other than the godforsaken camp. Samuel's eyes met hers, sharp and clear, despite his age. And because I see what you're planning. You're going to try to get those women out, aren't you? Elena's hands stilled on the ladle. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. Yes, you do. You've probably got 3 different plans already with backups for each one. Samuel bent closer, pretending to adjust the fire. There's a way out. The old mine shaft, the side tunnel I mentioned before. But you'd need someone who knows the way. Someone who's been through it 100 times hauling ore. And you'd guide us. For a price. Elena turned to look at him fondly. What price? Take me with you. When you go, whatever you do, don't leave me behind. Samuel's voice cracked slightly. I can't die here, sister. Not in this place. Not with these men. That's not a price. That's what I was planning to do anyway. Samuel blinked as if he'd expected negotiation, resistance, anything but simple acceptance. Then we have a deal, he said finally. Tonight after supper, I'll tell you everything. The road through the tunnel, the places where the ceiling sags, the spot where you have to crawl on your belly for 30 feet because the passage is barely wide enough for a child. He paused. Can those women do that, crawl through the dark? They'll do what they have to do. Even the sick one, Teresa. Elena's jaw tightened. We'll find a way. Samuel studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded, some tension leaving his stooped shoulders. I believe you will, sister. Whatever you really are, I believe you will. Day 4 brought the first test. Elena was carrying water from the well when she heard Ruth scream. The sound cut through the afternoon heat like a knife, high and terrified. Elena dropped the bucket and ran, her habit billowing behind her, her mind already calculating 50 yards to the sound. 3 bandits in direct line of sight. The nearest weapon, a shovel, leaning against the stable wall. She rounded the corner of the provisions cabin and stopped. Red Cooper had Ruth backed against the wall. The one-eyed marksman was grinning, his remaining eye bright with cruel amusement. One hand pressed against the wood beside Ruth's head, trapping her. The other held a rope which he was slowly winding around his fingers. Just teaching the little sister a lesson about manners, Red was saying. She bumped into me earlier, made me spill my coffee, figured she owed me an apology. I said I was sorry, Ruth whispered, her voice shaking. I said it 3 times. Didn't sound sincere enough. Red leaned closer. Maybe you need to get down on your knees and say it proper. Let her go. Elena's voice cut through the scene like a blade. Red turned, his grin widening. Well, the gardener nun. Come to protect your little friend. I said let her go. Or what, you'll pray at me? Red laughed, but he didn't release Ruth. Run along, sister. This ain't your business. Elena stepped forward. She didn't reach for the shovel, didn't look for weapons. She simply walked toward Red Cooper with a steady, measured pace that made no attempt at hurry or retreat. Something in that walk made Red's grin falter. "I said back off," he growled, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Elena kept walking. She stopped 3 feet away from him, close enough that he could have grabbed her if he wanted, close enough that she could see the sweat beading on his forehead, smell the tobacco on his breath, count the pulse beating in his neck. "Look at me," she said. Red looked. What he saw in Elena's eyes made him take a step back. It wasn't anger. Anger was hot, emotional, easy to dismiss. What Red saw was something colder, something that measured him and found him wanting, something that calculated exactly how he would die if he didn't move in the next 3 seconds. "I," Red swallowed. "I was just joking around. No harm done." Elena didn't blink. "Leave." Red left. He walked quickly, not quite running, toward the fire pit where the other bandits lounged. Elena watched him go, tracking his movements, noting how he glanced back twice with something that looked like fear. Then she turned to Ruth. "Are you hurt?" Ruth shook her head, but her whole body was trembling. "How did you do that? You didn't even touch him, and he looked terrified. Because he should be." Elena took Ruth's arm, guiding her back toward the cabin. "Some men are predators, Ruth. They hunt the weak because it makes them feel strong. But predators are also cowards. Show them that you're not prey, that you're something dangerous, and they'll find easier targets." "But you are dangerous, aren't you? Really dangerous?" Elena was silent for a long moment. "Yes," she said finally, "I am." Ruth should have been frightened, should have pulled away, retreated to the safety of the other sisters. Instead, she moved closer, her small hand finding Elena's. "Good," Ruth said quietly, "because I think we're going to need dangerous before this is over." Day 5, day 6, Elena worked methodically, preparing the ground for what was to come. In the kitchen, she had identified the herbs she needed among the supplies the bandits had stolen from the mission wagons. Senna leaves primarily mixed with a particular root that grew in the garden she'd tended for 18 years. Not enough to kill, not enough to cause lasting harm, but certainly enough to incapacitate. She added them to the evening stew on day 6, careful to prepare separate portions for the sisters and for Samuel. That night, 6 bandits fell violently ill. Elena listened to the sounds of their suffering from inside the cabin where she and the other sisters had been locked since sunset. Groans of pain, curses shouted into the darkness. The scramble of men rushing to the latrine pits dug behind the camp. "What's happening to them?" Sister Margaret demanded, her face pale in the moonlight. "Food poisoning, perhaps," Elena said calmly. "The meat might have been tainted." Mother Agnes caught her eye across the cabin. The old woman said nothing, but Elena could read the question in her gaze. "Was this you?" Elena gave the slightest nod. Agnes closed her eyes, and Elena could see her lips moving in what might have been prayer or might have been resignation. By morning, Driscoll was furious. "6 men," he snarled, pacing in front of the assembled camp. "6 of my best men sick as dogs, and you're telling me it was bad meat." "Could have been the water," one of the healthy bandits offered. "Well, water goes bad sometimes." "The water is fine." Driscoll's eyes swept the compound, searching for someone to blame. His gaze lingered on the sisters' cabin. "Someone did this deliberately. Someone is playing games with me." He turned to Silas, who stood apart from the others with his arms crossed and his mad eyes gleaming. "I want the nuns watched," Driscoll ordered. "Every moment, day and night. And that one, the quiet one who works in the kitchen. Elena, I want to know every move she makes." "Already on it, Captain." Silas's smile was thin and sharp. "That little sister's been busy. Real busy. Making friends with old Samuel, asking questions about the camp, the tunnels, the guard rotations." Driscoll's face went still. "Has she now told you there was something wrong with her? Something that don't fit?" "Then we'll find out what it is." Driscoll turned back toward his headquarters. "Watch her. And Silas, if she makes any move at all, you have my permission to be persuasive." Silas's grin widened. "My pleasure, Captain." The night of day 6 should have been her opportunity. With half the bandits incapacitated and the others scrambling to cover their shifts, Elena had calculated a window. A brief gap when the cabin would be unguarded for nearly 5 minutes. Long enough to move to test the route Samuel had described to verify that escape was possible. She waited until midnight, until the camp had fallen quiet except for the groans of sick men and the shuffle of exhausted guards. Then she rose. She moved through the cabin like smoke stepping over sleeping bodies without disturbing them. The window boards had a gap just wide enough for fingers, and the old wood came away without a sound if you applied pressure in exactly the right places. Elena slipped through into the darkness. The night was cold, the stars brilliant overhead. She pressed herself against the cabin wall, letting her eyes adjust, counting heartbeats, while she mapped the positions of the guards. One by the fire pit dozing, one by the horse corral, looking the other direction. The path to the mine entrance was clear. She took a step forward. "Couldn't sleep, sister." The voice came from the shadows behind her. Victim. Elena turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Silas the preacher. Cain stepped into the moonlight, his smile terrible and triumphant. "I've been watching you all night," he said, "waiting to see if you'd make a move. And here you are slipping through windows like a thief in the night." He tisked softly. "Not very nun-like behavior, is it? I needed air. The cabin is stuffy, and Sister Teresa is sick." "Is that so?" Silas moved closer, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Funny thing is, I've been doing some thinking about you, Sister Elena, about the way you move, the way you watch everything, the way old Red Cooper came running back from his little chat with you like he'd seen a ghost." "I don't know what you mean." "Don't you?" Silas stopped inches from her face. "I've seen eyes like yours before. In soldiers. In killers. In men who've done things that left pieces of their souls in the dirt." He tilted his head. "What did you do, sister, before you put on that habit and started pretending to be holy?" Elena said nothing. "Fine, keep your secrets for now." Silas grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. "But come morning, you're going to have a long talk with the captain. And I promise you, whatever game you're playing is over." He dragged her back toward the cabin, whistling softly in the darkness. And Elena, for all her training, for all her skills, let herself be dragged. Because fighting now would mean revealing everything, would mean killing, would mean becoming La Sombra in a moment when La Sombra could not save them all. Sometimes she remembered her father saying the strongest move is to appear weak. So she stumbled. She whimpered. She let tears streak down her face as Silas threw her back through the window and barred it shut from outside. And she began planning what she would do when the dawn came. They came for her at sunrise. Two bandits, not Silas, dragged Elena from the cabin while the other sisters watched in horror. Sister Ruth tried to follow, but a rifle butt to the shoulder sent her sprawling. "Elena!" Ruth screamed. "Elena!" "Stay with the others," Elena called back. "Whatever happens, stay together." They took her to Driscoll's headquarters. The room was the same as before, Confederate memorabilia on the walls, maps spread across the desk. But this time Driscoll wasn't alone. Silas stood in the corner, watching with gleeful anticipation. And on the desk, laid out like evidence in a courtroom, was Elena's small leather bag. Driscoll picked up the knife. It was a simple blade, barely 6 inches long with a worn wooden handle. Elena had carried it for 20 years through revolutions and escapes, in 18 years of pretending it didn't exist. The only remnant of the woman she used to be. "Interesting possession for a nun," Driscoll said, turning the knife in his hands. "Beautiful craftsmanship. Mexican unless I miss my guess. Military style." Elena said nothing. "And this?" Driscoll set down the knife and picked up a small drawstring pouch. "Senna leaves, and something else, some kind of root. I had old Samuel take a look at it. He says it's a purgative, makes a man's guts turn to water for about 12 hours. Still, Elena said nothing. "6 of my men were sick last night, violently sick. And you, Sister Elena, were the one who prepared their supper." Driscoll set down the pouch and fixed her with a cold stare. "Would you like to explain that the meat was bad? I warned Samuel before I added it to the stew, but he said supplies were running low and we couldn't waste it. Samuel says no such thing happened." "Then Samuel is lying to protect himself." Driscoll smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You're good, I'll give you that. Calm under pressure. Quick with explanations." He stood walking slowly around the desk toward her. "But I've been a soldier my whole life, sister. I know what training looks like, even when it's hidden beneath a habit and a rosary." He stopped in front of her, close enough to touch. "Stand up." Elena rose from her chair. Straighter. She straightened her spine automatically, shoulders back, chin level. The posture of a soldier, the stance her father had drilled into her before she could read or write. She realized her mistake a heartbeat too late. There it is, Driscoll murmured. That's not how a farmer's daughter from San Diego stands. That's how a soldier stands. That's how someone who's been trained for war stands. Elena forced herself to slouch around her shoulders, but the damage was done. Driscoll returned to his desk and picked up the knife again. He ran his thumb along the flat of the blade, studying the worn symbols carved into the handle. Mexico, he said slowly. 1864. I was there, you know, part of a Confederate expedition hired by Maximilian's forces to help crush the revolutionaries. His eyes narrowed. There was a general named Morales, Augusto Morales, led a unit that included women and children, if you can believe it. Fought like demons, every one of them. Elena's heart was pounding now, but she kept her face blank. The general had a daughter. Driscoll's voice was soft, almost contemplative. They called her La Sombra, the shadow, said she could move through an enemy camp like a ghost and leave nothing but bodies behind. He looked up at Elena. They said she killed 47 of my men before we finally trapped and executed her father. The number hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd known she'd killed during the war. She'd counted her own kills, the ones she was certain of. But 47, had there really been so many? General Morales was executed by firing squad, Driscoll continued, but his daughter escaped, disappeared into the night like the shadow she was named for. He set down the knife. For 20 years I've wondered what happened to La Sombra, where she went, what she became. He stepped closer to Elena, so close she could see the gray in his beard, the cold calculation in his eyes. Vasquez, he said. It's a common enough name. But Morales, that's the name you were born with, isn't it, Elena Morales? Daughter of the general who killed my men. La Sombra, the deadliest woman in Mexico. Elena's hands were steady at her sides. Her voice was calm when she spoke. That woman died a long time ago. Did she? Driscoll's smile was thin as a knife's edge. I don't think so. I think she's standing right in front of me wearing a nun's habit like a disguise, playing games with my men and my camp. I am a nun. I have been for 18 years. You're a killer who found a good hiding place. Driscoll stepped back, gesturing to Silas. Take her to the isolation cabin. I need to think about what to do with her. As Silas grabbed her arms, Driscoll added, and send word to Mexico City. I'm sure the government would pay handsomely for the last surviving member of the Morales bloodline, maybe even more than the church was willing to pay for 9 nuns. Elena let them drag her away, but as she passed through the door, she saw the other sisters watching from the window of their cabin. Ruth's face was streaked with tears. Margaret's jaw was slack with shock. Mother Agnes stood in the middle of the group, her eyes meeting Elena's across the compound. I'm sorry, Elena tried to say with her gaze. I'm sorry for lying. I'm sorry for putting you all in danger. Agnes's response was a single, almost imperceptible nod. Do what you must, that nod seemed to say. We trust you. But as the door of the isolation cabin slammed shut behind her, Elena wondered if that trust was deserved. They kept her isolated for 2 days. No food, minimal water. The cabin was barely large enough to stretch out in, with boards nailed so tightly over the single window that no light penetrated. Elena sat in the darkness, conserving her energy, running scenarios in her mind. On the second night, she heard voices outside. Angry voices. The diocese won't pay. That was Driscoll, his cultured, southern drawl rough with frustration. I told you they wouldn't. Silas's response carried a note of satisfaction. Church don't negotiate with outlaws. Never have, never will. Then we'll have to make them understand the consequences of that policy. A long pause. Tomorrow morning, the old one, the Mother Superior, we'll make an example of her. What kind of example? The permanent kind. Driscoll's voice hardened. String her up at dawn, let the others watch, then send word that we'll do the same to each of them one by one until someone pays or they're all dead. Elena's blood turned to ice. In the shadow, Silas asked. The Morales woman, she's valuable. We keep her alive until we hear from Mexico. Driscoll's footsteps moved away. But make sure she knows what's happening. Make sure she watches her precious Mother Superior die. I want to see if La Sombra is still hiding under that nun's habit. Elena waited until the footsteps faded. Then very carefully she began to work on the boards covering the window. The wood was old and soft with rot. By morning, Elena had created a gap just wide enough to see through and just wide enough perhaps to squeeze through if she had time. But time was exactly what she didn't have. Through the gap, she watched as Driscoll's men erected a makeshift gallows near the fire pit. Just a rope thrown over a crossbeam, a crate to kick away. Crude but effective. She watched as they dragged Mother Agnes from the sisters' cabin. Agnes didn't fight, didn't scream. She walked with her back straight and her head held high the way she'd walked through field hospitals during the war, the way she'd faced down death 100 times before. The other sisters did scream. Ruth was sobbing uncontrollably. Margaret was shouting scripture at the bandits, her voice raw and cracking. Even Sister Teresa, pale and trembling from her illness, had dragged herself to the cabin door to bear witness. And Elena could do nothing but watch. Think. Think. There has to be a way. She could break through the window, could rush the gallows, could probably kill 3, maybe 4 men before they brought her down. But Driscoll had anticipated that. Silas stood beside her cabin door with his pistol drawn, watching for any sign of movement. Red Cooper had his rifle trained on the sisters' cabin, ready to fire if anyone tried to interfere. If Elena acted, people would die. The wrong people. Agnes reached the gallows. 2 bandits lifted her onto the crate, settled the rope around her neck. She didn't flinch, didn't close her eyes. Instead, she turned her head toward Elena's cabin. "Elena," she called, her voice carrying across the compound. "Can you hear me?" Elena pressed her face against the gap in the boards. "I'm here. I want you to know something." Agnes's voice was steady, impossibly calm. "I forgive you for the secrets, for everything you couldn't tell me." She paused. "And I want you to forgive yourself. Whatever happens next, whatever you have to do, remember that God measures us not by our sins, but by our repentance." "Agnes, don't. The woman you were made mistakes, the woman you became, has spent 18 years trying to atone for them." Agnes smiled, a peaceful, radiant smile that seemed impossibly out of place with a noose around her neck. "Perhaps today is the day you finish that atonement. Perhaps today is the day La Sombra dies forever and only Sister Elena remains." Driscoll stepped forward, his hand on the rope. "Any last words for the church that abandoned you, Mother Superior?" Agnes looked at him with something that might have been pity. "I will pray for your soul, Captain, because you will need those prayers more than I will." Driscoll's face darkened. "We'll see about that." He nodded to the men standing by the crate. Elena's hands curled into fists. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to move, to fight, to do something, anything. The shadow inside her surged against its chains, howling for blood. And then, impossibly, a new voice cut through the tension. "Stop." Billy Hawkins stepped out of the crowd of bandits, his face pale but determined. "Billy," Driscoll said slowly, "get back in line." "No, sir." Billy's voice shook, but he didn't retreat. "This ain't right. She's an old woman, a nun. She ain't done nothing to deserve this. She's leverage, and she's become a liability." Driscoll's hand tightened on the rope. "One more word, boy, and you'll join her." Billy's eyes darted toward Elena's cabin, toward the other sisters, toward the rope around Agnes's neck. Then he did something that changed everything. He drew his pistol, not aimed at anyone, just held at his side, a clear signal that he was done following orders. "I signed on to kidnap some nuns and get paid," Billy said. "I didn't sign on for murder, and I ain't gonna stand here and watch you hang an innocent woman." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Then Silas raised his gun and fired. Billy went down with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder. His pistol skittered across the dirt, stopping inches from Elena's cabin wall. "Anyone else want to play hero?" Silas's voice was ice cold. "Anyone else want to question the captain's orders?" Silence. Driscoll looked at Billy's crumpled form, then at the other men, then at Mother Agnes. "Hang her," he said. "Wait." The voice came from Elena's cabin, but it wasn't desperate. It wasn't pleading. It was calm, cold, controlled. "Wait," Elena said again. "I'll give you what you want. Information about Mexico, about the revolutionary networks, names, locations, everything my father taught me before he died." Driscoll paused, his hand still on the rope. "That information is 20 years old. Some of it, but the families are still there. The descendants, the loyalties. Elena pressed her face against the gap in the boards. I can give you enough to buy your way back into someone's favor, enough to rebuild everything you lost after the war. All I ask is that you let her live. Driscoll considered this. And the others, the sisters have nothing to do with this. Let them go. Keep me. I'm the valuable one, aren't I? I'm the one Mexico will pay for. Elena, no, Agnes gasped. Be quiet, Agnes. Elena's voice was sharp. This is my choice. Let me make it. Driscoll studied her through the gap in the boards. Then slowly he removed his hand from the rope. Take the noose off her, he ordered. Put her back with the others. He turned toward Elena's cabin. But you, La Sombra, you stay where you are. And tomorrow you and I are going to have a very long conversation about what you know and what it's worth to me. The bandits removed the rope from Agnes's neck and escorted her back to the sisters' cabin. As she passed Elena's prison, Agnes caught her eye. Thank you, Agnes mouthed. I'm sorry, Elena mouthed back. I'm sorry for all of it. And in the darkness of her isolation, Elena began to plan. Night fell with a crushing weight. Elena sat in the pitch blackness of her cabin, listening to the sounds of the camp. Billy Hawkins had been dragged to one of the storage buildings, his wound bandaged, roughly his freedom gone. The other sisters had been locked down tighter than ever. And somewhere out there, Driscoll was preparing for the interrogation that would begin at dawn. She had bought them time, hours, maybe a day. But time meant nothing if she couldn't find a way to use it. Think, there has to be a way. But every plan she constructed fell apart under scrutiny. The guards had doubled. Silas was watching her cabin personally, and even if she could escape, even if she could free the others, Sister Teresa was too weak to run, and leaving her behind was not an option. The shadow inside her whispered, you know what you have to do. You know who you have to become. Elena pressed her palms against her eyes. She remembered the last time she'd surrendered to that voice. The cantina in Hermosillo. The traitor's face as she drove the knife home. The way she twisted the blade, wanting him to feel every second of it. You liked it, the shadow whispered. You liked watching him die. You liked the power of it, the control. After everything they took from you, you finally got to take something back. That wasn't power, Elena whispered into the darkness. That was weakness. That was letting the hatred win. And what about now? What about Agnes and Ruth and all the others who will die if you don't act? Is letting them die better than letting the hatred win? Elena had no answer. The hours crawled past. Midnight came and went. The camp grew quiet. And in that silence, Elena heard something she hadn't expected. Footsteps, light, careful, coming toward her cabin. She pressed herself against the wall, her body tensing automatically. Through the gap in the boards, she could see a figure approaching, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who didn't want to be noticed. The bar on her door lifted. The door creaked open, and Sister Margaret stepped inside. Don't make a sound, Margaret whispered, closing the door behind her. Silas is passed out drunk by the fire pit. We have maybe 5 minutes before someone notices I'm gone. Elena stared at her in disbelief. How did you get out? The boards on our window were loose. Ruth found the weak spots, just like you taught her. Margaret's face was barely visible in the darkness, but Elena could hear the tension in her voice. We need to talk. Margaret, this isn't safe. If they catch you, then they catch me, but there's something I need to say first. Margaret took a shaky breath. I've spent 3 years suspecting you. 3 years watching you, waiting for you to slip up, convinced that there was something wrong with you. And I was right. There was something wrong, something you were hiding. I'm sorry. Don't. Margaret's voice hardened. Don't apologize, because here's what I realized tonight while I watched them put a rope around Agnes's neck and you offered yourself in her place. She paused. I've been so busy looking for the sinner that I never saw the saint. I'm not a saint, Margaret. No, you're a killer, a trained killer who could have escaped a dozen times already, who could have fought her way out and left the rest of us behind. Margaret stepped closer. But you didn't. You stayed. You protected Ruth when that man threatened her. You bargained with Driscoll for Agnes's life. You've been planning and scheming not to save yourself, but to save all of us. Elena said nothing. I was wrong about you, Margaret continued. Whatever you did before, whoever you were, it doesn't matter. What matters is who you are now. And right now, you're the only one who can get us out of this alive. I don't know if I can. Neither do I, but I believe you'll try. And I believe, Margaret's voice caught, I believe that if anyone can find a way, it's you. La Sombra, the shadow, whatever you want to call yourself. She pressed something into Elena's hand. Something cold, something metal. A key. Billy Hawkins, Margaret whispered. Before they dragged everyone, he managed to slip this to Ruth. Said it was the key to the supply cabin. Said there are weapons inside and he would have gotten them himself if Silas hadn't shot him. Elena's fingers closed around the key. Margaret, don't thank me. Just save us. Margaret moved toward the door. I'll make sure Silas stays distracted. You do whatever you have to do. She slipped out into the night, leaving Elena alone with the key and the shadows and the decision she'd been dreading. Elena sat in the darkness with the key in her hand. She could feel the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, but the weight of everything it represented. The weapons in the supply cabin. The skills she'd buried for 18 years. The woman she'd sworn never to become again. You know what you have to do. She closed her eyes and the memories came flooding back. Her father teaching her to shoot when she was 12 years old. The gun is a tu mihija, like a hammer or a plow. It's not good or evil. It's how you use it that matters. Her father bleeding in the dust of a Mexican plaza. Don't let hatred consume you. Find another way to live. The traitor dying slowly in a cantina in Hermosillo. The pleasure she'd felt watching his eyes go dark. The mission, the garden, the peace she'd found in 18 years of prayer and penance. You vowed never to take a life in anger. But was it anger she felt now? Looking inside herself, Elena found fear, found desperation, found a fierce protective love for the women who had become her family. But hatred, no. That fire had burned out long ago. The question isn't whether you remember how to fight, Agnes had told her. The question is whether you'll choose to use those memories. Elena opened her eyes. She'd spent 18 years running from La Sombra. 18 years trying to bury the killer, to suffocate her with prayers and rosaries and acts of kindness. And all that time the shadow had waited, patient, ready. But maybe Agnes was right. Maybe the shadow wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a gift she'd never known how to use properly. 18 years ago, you killed for hatred. Tonight, if you kill it, will be for love. There's a difference, Elena realized. There has to be. She rose to her feet in the darkness. She tucked the key into her habit, and she began to plan not as Sister Elena Vasquez, not as La Sombra, but as something new. Something that combined both parts of herself into a single unified purpose. Tomorrow the guards would come for her. Tomorrow Driscoll would begin his interrogation. But tonight, in the small hours before dawn, Elena Morales would rise one last time. Not to kill, not to destroy, to save. And if saving meant fighting, if saving meant becoming the shadow one more time, then so be it. Because some sins were worth committing and some prices were worth paying. She just hoped God would understand. 3 o'clock in the morning, day 10. Elena moved through the darkness like water through stone, silent and inevitable. The key Margaret had given her fit the lock on her cabin door with a soft click that seemed impossibly loud in the desert stillness. She slipped outside. The camp lay quiet beneath a blanket of stars. The fire pit had burned down to embers, casting a faint orange glow across the compound. 2 guards sat near the horses, their heads nodding with exhaustion. Silas was exactly where Margaret had said he'd be slumped against a supply crate with an empty bottle beside him. Elena counted heartbeats, measured distances, calculated angles. Then she moved. The supply cabin door opened without a sound. Inside, she found what Billy had promised: rifles, pistols, ammunition. Enough firepower to start a small war. She took only her knife. The blade felt strange in her hand after so many years, lighter than she remembered. Or perhaps she was simply stronger now, tempered by 18 years of labor and prayer. This is it, she thought. The moment you've been dreading. The moment you become her again. But as she tucked the knife into her habit, Elena realized something had changed. The shadow inside her was awake, yes, alert, ready, but it wasn't hungry anymore. It wasn't howling for blood. It was simply waiting, patient, controlled. I'm not becoming La Sombra, she understood suddenly. I'm using what La Sombra taught me. There's a difference. She crept to the sister's cabin next. The window boards came away easily loosened by Ruth's careful work over the past few days. One by one, the women slipped through into the night. Mother Agnes emerged first, her face calm despite everything. Then Sister Margaret, jaw set with determination. Ruth came next, her eyes finding Elena's in the darkness with a look of fierce trust. Finally, Sister Teresa, so weak she could barely stand, supported on either side by two of the other nuns. "The mine," Elena whispered. "Samuel's waiting." They moved in single-file ghosts in black habits drifting through the shadows. Elena brought up the rear, her eyes scanning constantly, her ears straining for any sound of alarm. They reached the mine entrance without incident. Old Samuel stood just inside the darkness, a hooded lantern in his gnarled hands. "Thought you weren't coming," he muttered. "We're here now." Elena did a quick count. 8 sisters. Samuel. Billy Hawkins wounded, but Mobile had somehow dragged himself from the storage shed to join them. Everyone accounted for. "Then let's move. We've got maybe 2 miles of tunnel ahead, and some of it ain't pretty." The mine swallowed them whole. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 women to walk abreast. The crawling section was exactly as Samuel had described, a narrow gap where the ceiling had partially collapsed, leaving a space barely 2 feet high. Elena helped each sister through, then carried Teresa through on her back, moving on her elbows and knees, while the older woman clung to her. On the other side, Elena allowed herself a moment to breathe. They'd come perhaps half a mile. The worst was behind them. That was when the alarm bell began to ring. The sound was distant, muffled by tons of rock, but unmistakable. Someone had discovered their escape. "Move!" Samuel hissed. "Move now!" They ran as best they could through the darkness. Elena kept Teresa on her back, her legs burning, her lungs screaming for air. Behind them she could hear voices echoing down the tunnel. Shouts, curses, the heavy tread of boots on stone. "How much farther?" Ruth gasped. "Half mile, maybe less." Samuel's voice was strained. "There's a fork up ahead. The right passage leads out. The left one ends in the cave-in. They're gaining on us." Elena made a decision. "Samuel, take them. Get them to the exit." "What are you going to do?" Elena set Teresa down, gently transferring her weight to Margaret and Ruth. Then she turned to face the darkness behind them, where the sounds of pursuit were growing louder. "What I should have done days ago." "Elena, no." Ruth's voice cracked. "You can't." "I can." Elena looked at her, at this young woman she'd come to love like a daughter. "Ruth, you taught me something important these past few days. You trusted me even when you didn't understand what I was, even when you were afraid." She reached out and touched Ruth's cheek. "Now I need you to trust me one more time. Get them out. Get them safe. I'll be right behind you. Promise me." Elena hesitated. In the flickering lantern light, Ruth's eyes were bright with tears. "I promise I'll try." It wasn't enough. They both knew it. But Ruth nodded once, and then she was moving, helping to carry Teresa down the right-hand passage while Samuel led the way. Elena turned to face the darkness. She didn't have to wait long. 3 bandits rounded the corner at a run. Their lantern threw wild light across the tunnel walls, and their guns were drawn. Elena stepped into the deepest shadow and waited. The first man never saw her. She moved from the darkness like a striking snake, her hand clamping over his mouth, while her other arm wrapped around his throat. 3 seconds of pressure to the carotid, and he slumped unconscious against the tunnel wall. The second man spun at the sound, raising his rifle. Elena was already moving. She ducked under his swing, drove her elbow into his solar plexus, and used his own momentum to slam his head against the stone. He dropped without a sound. The third man was Silas. He stood at the edge of the lantern light, his pistol raised, his mad eyes gleaming in the darkness. Silas was strong, stronger than he looked, and his madness gave him a terrible focus. He slammed Elena against the tunnel wall, his pistol rising toward her face. She caught his wrist, twisted, felt bones grind against each other. The gun clattered to the ground. "Not bad," Silas grunted. "But I've killed men with my bare hands. Women, too. You're just another notch on my—" Elena drove her knee into his groin. Silas doubled over, and Elena struck. Her knife flashed in the lantern light, driving deep into the meat of his shoulder, missing the heart by inches. By choice, Silas screamed and fell. Elena stood over him, breathing hard, her knife red with his blood. The shadow inside her stirred, hungry, whispering that one more thrust would end this, would make sure he never hurt anyone again. Kill him. He deserves it. You know what he's done. You know what he would have done to the sisters if he'd had the chance. For one terrible moment, Elena's hand tightened on the knife. Then she stepped back. I could kill you, she said, her voice steady. 20 years ago, I would have. I would have enjoyed it. She pulled a strip of cloth from her habit and tossed it at him. But I'm not that woman anymore. Bind your wound. When you can walk, go tell Driscoll what happened here. Silas stared at her, his face twisted with pain and confusion. Why spare me? Elena looked at the man she had defeated, at the blood on her hands, at the shadow that had finally, after all these years, learned to obey. Because killing you wouldn't save anyone. It would only damn me. She turned toward the darkness where the others had gone. And I've spent 18 years trying to find my way back to the light. I'm not going to lose it now. She walked away without looking back. Dawn was breaking when Elena emerged from the tunnel. The exit opened onto a rocky slope overlooking a vast expanse of desert. In the distance, maybe 2 miles away, she could see the outline of a road, and beyond that, the scattered buildings of a small town. Pinel, she assumed. Safety. The sisters were there, huddled together in the early morning chill. Samuel sat on a rock, his old face gray with exhaustion. Billy Hawkins leaned against the cliff face, his wounded shoulder wrapped in bloody bandages. Teresa lay on the ground with her head in Agnes's lap, barely conscious but alive. And standing between them and freedom, blocking the path down the slope, was William Driscoll. He wasn't alone. 5 bandits stood with him, their weapons drawn, their faces hard. They must have ridden around the mountain, anticipating this exit. Driscoll was too experienced to have only one plan. Well, Driscoll's voice carried across the rocky ground. La Sombra emerges. I was beginning to think you died in those tunnels. Elena moved to stand between Driscoll and the sisters. Her knife was still in her hand, red with Silas's blood. Let them go, Driscoll. This is between you and me. Is it? Driscoll gestured at the women behind her. They're worth $10,000. More if I can convince the right people that the daughter of Augusto Morales is among them. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You've cost me a great deal of trouble, sister. Men, time, credibility. I'm not inclined to let any of you walk away. Then you'll have to go through me. That can be arranged. Elena assessed the situation with the cold clarity of a soldier. 6 men all armed, she had a knife. The sisters were defenseless. Even if she could take down 2 or 3 before they shot her, the others would finish the job. And then there would be no one left to protect the women she'd come to love. She needed another option. Your father, Elena said suddenly. Driscoll's eyes narrowed. What about him? He was a soldier too, wasn't he, before the war? Before everything fell apart. Elena took a step forward, her voice carrying across the still morning air. You grew up believing in something, honor, duty, the nobility of service. And then the war came and it took everything from you, your home, your family, your purpose. Don't pretend to understand me. I'm not pretending. I understand you better than you know. Elena's voice softened. My father was a general. He taught me to fight before he taught me to read. I believed in his cause the way you believed in yours. And when they killed him, when they took everything I had, I became something monstrous. Driscoll said nothing, but Elena could see she had his attention. You and my father, she continued. You're more alike than you want to admit. Both soldiers, both men who lost everything to war, both angry at a world that betrayed you. She paused. But there was one difference. My father fought to build something, a nation, a future for his people. You, start over. Find something to build instead of something to burn. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Then Driscoll laughed. A pretty speech, La Sombra, but speeches don't change anything. He drew his pistol and aimed it at Elena's heart. Now say goodbye to your... The gunshot came from behind him. Driscoll's weapon flew from his hands, spinning into the dust. He whirled, clutching his wrist, and found himself staring at Billy Hawkins, who had somehow managed to draw a pistol despite his wounded shoulder. Sorry, Captain, Billy said, his voice shaking but his aim steady. But she's right. This ain't what I signed up for. This ain't who I want to be. The 5 remaining bandits exchanged uncertain glances. Billy was one of them, had ridden with them for months. And now he was pointing a gun at their leader. Anyone else? Billy called out. Anyone else tired of being a bandit? Anyone else want to walk away from this and start fresh? A long moment passed. Then 3 of the 5 bandits lowered their weapons and stepped away from Driscoll. Jake, one of them said to another, the boy's right. We signed on for easy money, not murder. Not this. The hell are you doing? Driscoll snarled. I gave you everything. Shelter, purpose, a chance to take back what was stolen from us. You gave us blood and fear, the bandit replied. That ain't a purpose. That's just more of what we were trying to escape. They walked away, disappearing down the slope toward the road. That left Driscoll and 2 loyal men. You still want to do this? Elena asked quietly. 3 against all of us, with your hand wounded and your men deserting. Driscoll's face contorted with rage. I'll kill you myself. He drew a knife from his belt and charged. The fight was brutal and brief. Driscoll was older than Elena, but he'd been fighting his whole life. His blade flashed in the dawn light, driving her back across the rocky ground. She parried, dodged, looked for an opening that wouldn't come. You think you can preach to me, Driscoll snarled between strikes. You think you can lecture me about destruction? Your father killed 47 of my men. 47 boys who had families, dreams, futures. And you have the audacity to talk about building? Elena blocked a thrust that would have opened her throat. I know what my father did. I know what I did. That's why I stopped. You didn't stop. You hid. Driscoll pressed his advantage, driving her back toward the cliff edge. You put on that habit and pretended the blood wasn't still on your hands. But it is. It always will be. He was right. Elena knew he was right. The blood would never wash away. The 23 men she'd killed, the 47 Driscoll, claimed all those lives ended by her hands. No amount of prayer could bring them back. No amount of penance could balance that scale. But that didn't mean she had to add to the count. Driscoll lunged. Elena sidestepped and caught his wrist twisted. His knife clattered to the ground. She swept his legs and he went down hard, the breath exploding from his lungs. Before he could recover, Elena was on top of him, her knife at his throat. Do it, Driscoll gasped. Finish it. That's what La Sombra would do. Elena looked down at him, at this man who had kidnapped her sisters, who had threatened to hang Mother Agnes, who had spent weeks terrorizing innocent women for money he would never receive. The shadow inside her stirred one last time. Kill him. He deserves it. He'll only hurt more people if you let him live. Elena's hand tightened on the knife, and then very deliberately she pulled it away. La Sombra is dead, she said. She died 18 years ago in a convent courtyard in the arms of a woman who believed she could become something better. Elena stood stepping back from Driscoll's prone form. My name is Elena. I'm a nun, a gardener, a protector, and I choose to let you live. Driscoll stared at her, incomprehension written across his face. Why? Because if I can forgive you for what you've done, maybe, Elena's voice caught, maybe I can finally forgive myself for what I did. She turned her back on him. It was the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. Every instinct screamed at her to watch him, to keep him in sight, to be ready for the attack that had to be coming. But she kept walking. The girl, Driscoll called after her. Ruth, she's young, innocent, the way you used to be, maybe. His voice was hoarse. You really think you can protect her? Really think you can keep her safe from a world that wants to devour her? Elena stopped. I don't know, she said without turning around, but I'm going to try. Every day, for the rest of my life, I'm going to try. She looked over her shoulder at him, at this broken man lying in the dust. That's all any of us can do, Driscoll. Try to be better than we were yesterday. Try to build something instead of destroy it. She walked back to the sisters. Behind her, she heard Driscoll struggle to his feet, heard him give some low command to his 2 remaining men, heard their footsteps retreating toward the horses tied somewhere out of sight. She didn't look back. Is it over? Ruth whispered. Elena wrapped an arm around the young woman's shoulders. Yes, it's over. You let him go. I did. Why? Elena looked at the sun rising over the desert, painting the rocks in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing. Because killing him wouldn't have brought back the people I've lost, wouldn't have undone the things I've done. She squeezed Ruth closer. And because someone very wise once told me that we can't forget who we were. We can only choose what to do with it. Ruth leaned into her. Mother Agnes. Mother Agnes. They helped Teresa to her feet, supported her between them, and began the long walk toward Pinal. The town of Pinal was small, barely more than a trading post, and a few dozen buildings huddled together against the vastness of the Arizona desert. But it had a sheriff and a telegraph, and that was enough. The story took hours to tell. The kidnapping, the camp, the escape through the mine, the confrontation at the mountain's edge. Sheriff Morrison listened to all of it with a face like carved stone, and when they were finished, he sent telegrams to the territorial marshal in the diocese in California. "You'll need to stay in town until the authorities sort this out," he said. "But from what you've told me, you ladies are heroes. You got yourselves out of a bad situation without anyone dying." Without anyone dying. The words echoed in Elena's mind as they settled into the town's small hotel. She'd fought, she'd hurt people, but she hadn't killed. After everything, after all the violence and fear and desperate midnight struggles, her count remained the same. 23. It wasn't redemption. She knew that. Nothing could redeem the things she'd done, but it was something, a line held, a choice made, a shadow controlled instead of unleashed. Mother Agnes found her that evening sitting on the hotel's narrow porch and watching the sunset over the desert. "May I join you?" Elena nodded. Agnes lowered herself into the adjacent chair with a small groan. The past 10 days had taken their toll on all of them, but Agnes at 65 had felt it more than most. "You've been quiet since we arrived," Agnes said. "Not that you're ever particularly loud, but this is different. This is the quiet of someone carrying a heavy burden. I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, what I should have done differently. Such as..." Elena was silent for a long moment. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning, about who I was, about what I could do. Would it have changed anything? I don't know, maybe. Maybe if you'd known, you could have prepared, could have made different choices." Agnes reached over and took Elena's hand. Her fingers were papery and thin, but her grip was still strong. "Let me tell you something, Elena, something I should have told you years ago." She took a breath. "When you came to us half dead and burning with fever, I knew exactly what you were. Not the details, perhaps, but the shape of it. The blood on your soul. The weight you carried." Elena looked at her. "You knew. I was a war nurse child. I've seen what violence does to people, both the ones who suffer it and the ones who inflict it. I recognize the look in your eyes, the exhaustion of someone who has killed and can't live with the killing. Then why did you take me in?" Agnes smiled, and in that smile, Elena saw the woman she'd been all those years ago, the woman who had walked into a river and chosen to turn back. "Because everyone deserves the chance to become someone new. Because the woman standing in my courtyard wasn't a killer anymore. She was a lost soul looking for a path home." Agnes squeezed her hand. "And because I believed, and I still believe, that the skills that make someone a warrior can also make them a protector. It's just a matter of choosing what to fight for." Elena felt tears welling in her eyes. "I was so afraid. All those years I was afraid that if I ever had to fight again, I would become what I was, that the shadow would consume me. And did it? No." The word came out as a whisper. "No, it didn't. I fought and I won, and I didn't kill anyone. I chose not to kill anyone." "Then perhaps," Agnes said gently, "it's time to stop being afraid of the shadow. Perhaps it's time to accept it as part of who you are and trust yourself to use it wisely." Elena looked at her hands, the same hands that had killed 23 men, the same hands that had planted gardens, prepared medicines, held rosaries, and tonight protected the people she loved without adding to the count. "How do I do that?" "The same way you do anything difficult." Agnes rose, leaning on Elena's shoulder for support. "One day at a time, one choice at a time, one prayer at a time." She walked back into the hotel, leaving Elena alone with the sunset and the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. 1 year later, the Mission Santa Cruz looked the same as it always had, white adobe walls gleaming in the California sun, the garden spreading out behind it in neat rows of herbs and vegetables. But things had changed in ways that visitors couldn't see. In the courtyard where Elena had once collapsed, barely alive, a group of young women now gathered every Thursday afternoon. They wore the simple habits of novices, their faces bright with concentration as they practiced the movements Elena taught them. Breathe, Elena instructed, walking among them. That's the foundation of everything. When you're afraid, your body wants to panic. But if you breathe slowly and deeply, you can control the fear. You can think clearly. You can act. Sister Elena, a young novice, raised her hand. Is it true what they say, that you were once a soldier? Elena stopped. A year ago, that question would have filled her with shame, would have made her want to flee, to hide, to deny everything she'd been. Now she simply smiled. Yes, a long time ago I was a soldier. I fought in a war and I did things I'm not proud of. She looked around at the young faces watching her. But that's not why I'm teaching you this. I'm teaching you because the world can be dangerous and good people should know how to protect themselves and others. But isn't violence wrong? Violence for its own sake is a wrong. Violence born of hatred or greed or the desire to dominate, that's wrong. Elena picked up a wooden practice staff, weighing it in her hands. But violence in defense of the innocent, violence to protect the people you love, that's different. That's not destruction. That's protection. She demonstrated a simple block, then a counterstrike. The novices mimicked her movements, clumsy but earnest. Remembered, Elena said, these skills are not for harming, they're for protecting. And the reason you carry these abilities, that's what matters most. Through the window of the main building, she could see Mother Agnes watching. The old woman raised a hand in acknowledgement, a small smile on her weathered face. After class, Sister Ruth found Elena in the garden. Ruth had changed in the years since their ordeal. There was a steadiness in her eyes now, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She'd finished her novitiate and taken her final vows, becoming a full sister of the order. The new novices are doing well, Ruth said, falling into step beside Elena. They're eager to learn. That helps. They look at you like you're a hero, you know. Elena laughed softly. I'm no hero, just a woman who made a lot of mistakes and is trying to do better. Isn't that what a hero is? Ruth stopped, turning to face her. Elena, I never properly thanked you for what you did in that camp, for teaching me to be brave when I was terrified, for showing me that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about choosing to act despite the fear. Elena took Ruth's hands in her own. You don't need to thank me. You're family, Ruth. You all are. I know. Ruth smiled, and in that smile, Elena saw the young woman she'd first met 3 years ago, transformed by hardship into something stronger, but no less kind. That's why I wanted to tell you something. I've decided to stay here at Santa Cruz instead of transferring to the Tucson mission. Oh, this is home now. You're here. Agnes is here. Margaret is here, even if she's still as prickly as a cactus. Ruth laughed. I don't want to leave. Elena felt warmth spreading through her chest. I'm glad. I would have missed you. They walked together through the garden, past the rows of herbs that Elena had tended for nearly 2 decades. Lavender and rosemary, chamomile and sage, plants for healing, plants for cooking, plants for peace. Sister Elena. Ruth's voice was soft. Do you ever think about Driscoll, about what happened to him? Elena was quiet for a moment. She'd heard rumors months ago that a man matching Driscoll's description had been seen in New Mexico working as a ranch hand. No longer a bandit, no longer a kidnapper, just a man trying to start over. She didn't know if it was true. Maybe it was just a story, a hopeful ending her mind had invented, but she chose to believe it. Sometimes, she admitted, I pray for him. I pray that he found what I found, a chance to become someone different. Do you think he did? Elena looked up at the sky, vast and blue and endless above them. I think, she said slowly, that everyone has a shadow. Everyone carries darkness inside them, memories of the things they've done and the things they wish they hadn't. The question isn't whether the shadow exists. The question is whether we let it control us or whether we learn to walk beside it. She picked a sprig of lavender and tucked it into Ruth's habit. I spent 18 years running from my shadow, Ruth, hiding from it, pretending it didn't exist. And in the end, I learned that running doesn't work. The only way forward is acceptance, accepting who you were, accepting who you are, and choosing every single day who you want to become. Ruth nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. That's what you're teaching those novices, isn't it? Not just how to fight, how to accept themselves. Elena smiled. I'm teaching them what Mother Agnes taught me, what my father tried to teach me before I was ready to listen. She looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the Pacific. That our past doesn't have to define our future. That the same hands that have destroyed can also protect. And that the reason we carry our abilities, that's what matters most. They stood together in the garden as the light turned golden around them, two women shaped by hardship and violence and love, finding peace not by forgetting the past, but by choosing what to build from it. And somewhere in the distance, a bell began to ring, calling the sisters to evening prayer. That night, Elena dreamed. She was standing in the desert again. But it wasn't the desert of Arizona, the red rocks and saguaro cacti of her captivity. It was Mexico, the Mexico of her childhood, the Mexico of her father. General Augusto Morales stood before her, wearing the uniform she remembered from so long ago. His face was older than it should have been, lined with all the years that death had stolen from him. But his eyes were the same, warm, proud, loving. Mi hija, he said, my shadow. Father, I've been watching you. He reached out and touched her cheek, and his hand was solid, real warm against her skin. I've seen what you've become. I'm sorry, Elena whispered. For so long, I'm sorry. I didn't listen to you. I let the hatred consume me, just like you warned. I became something monstrous. Yes, her father nodded. You did. And then and then I chose to be something else. He smiled, and in that smile she saw all the love he'd carried for her, all the hopes he'd had for the child who'd become a soldier, become a killer, become a nun. That's all I ever wanted for you, Elena. Not that you would never fall, not that you would be perfect, just that when you fell, you would find the strength to rise again. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. I'm proud of you, mi hija, not for the battles you won, for the battle you chose not to fight. Elena woke with tears on her cheeks and peace in her heart. Outside her window, the sun was rising over the Mission Santa Cruz. Another day was beginning, another chance to choose who she would be. She rose dressed in her habit and walked to the chapel for morning prayers. The desert light caught her face through the stained glass window, painting her in colors of gold and crimson and deep eternal blue. A face that had seen war and peace, violence and redemption, shadow and light. A face that had finally found its way home, not by forgetting the past, not by running from the shadow, but by accepting it as part of herself and choosing every single day to use it for something greater than destruction, to use it for love.